Agree to?
Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to acknowledge the words of the Minister and in particular the dedication of this new research institute to the late Sir Paul Callaghan, someone who commanded, I think, the universal respect of this House for his contribution to science and learning and his contribution to New Zealand's economic development, and we'd certainly echo that. Mr. Speaker, Labour will be supporting this bill to set up the Advanced Technology Institute. We think it's a small step in the right direction, Mr. Speaker, but not by any means enough. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand spends less than 1% of its gross domestic product on innovation and research and development. Of that, about 0.6%, about 2/3, comes from the government and only 1/3 from the private sector. The OECD average is 2.5 times New Zealand's level of investment, and that's the average, and the leading small smart countries invest between 3 and 5 times New Zealand's level of investment per capita in R&D. Now, in this year's budget, the government increased slightly in nominal terms the investment in innovation and research. However, it cut almost 3 times that amount from the economic development budget, thus effectively rearranging the deck chairs on a growth program that is simply not working. I think we need to concede that when this government was first elected, a number of New Zealanders, including some of those in the research and technology sector, thought that they were prepared to consult and that that was a good thing. And the government, it has been said by some, brought a style to its operations which appeared to be in touch with the community, and that was welcomed by some. Isn't it interesting how times have changed, Mr. Speaker? In 4 years, what we hear now is the sound of dashed expectations. They consulted and they did nothing. They promised a brighter future. What we got was longer unemployment queues. They said that they would innovate, but instead they are continuing subsidies to pastoral agriculture and seem to equate extractive mining with economic nirvana. That's not to denigrate the huge contribution of agriculture or the significant place of mining in our economy, but it is to say that it is not a sufficient answer. What I think there is bipartisan support for, and why we're supporting this bill, is the clear importance of innovation and R&D to be at the heart of our economic development system. And we recognise that something like an Advanced Technology Institute could play a key part in that role. But New Zealanders need to understand that while the government talks the talk, it's only taking at best baby steps on the walk. Mr. Speaker, let's look for a moment at some of the implementation issues that surround the Advanced Technology Institute. Mr. Speaker, there are no scientists on the establishment board. It's wholly made up of managers and executives. It's top-heavy with management. The lack of scientific voices in the governance arrangements demonstrate that it's not about science at all, but just the commercialisation of it. The government is trying, Mr. Jordan, sir, is an entrepreneur first and foremost. The government is trying to make a big deal of all the new funding. The reality is that while $166 million has been committed to develop ATI, most of this came from existing savings. They've taken from Peter to pay Paul. The total rose by only $37 million. Meanwhile, the MED budget was cut as part of the Mobi transfer by around 3 times that amount. Another proportion of the funding comes from the planned sale of state assets, and that asset sales program is on the rocks because the government can't even do a bad thing well. Interesting, isn't it, that IRL is being made a subsidiary under this bill, because we know that the government has a policy of being able to privatise subsidiaries, thus raising the question of IRL's long-term future. Mr. Speaker, the brief of ATI needs to be able to address the key impediments to technology-led economic development, particularly routes to market and the availability of investment capital. And there's nothing in the plans for the ATI that address either issue. The government has in the past referred to the Danish model, the Danish Technology Institute, but what's interesting is that's moving in exactly the opposite direction from the ATI by allocating more resources to research via consultancy and activities, whereas ATI is bringing them in-house. Mr. Speaker, the brief of the ATI is relatively narrow to the manufacturing industry, or started that way, has recently been increased to include food and wood products. And an issue is whether that is now too wide and whether the relationship with between ATI and other CRIs like Scion, for example, who also deals with wood products, is in fact clear or proper. There is a clear danger with the government's habit of trying to boil the ocean and doing nothing well. And in the detail of the arrangements are issues like the tight time frame, with a September 30 report back, and that'll be a matter, sir, that we wish to take up in the later motion. The skill set of the CE, the role of existing commercialisation units, how the ATI will actually differ in practice from other CRIs, how it will work with universities, which continue to act like fiefdoms, each trying to do everything, and the government apparently giving up on the very sound idea of creating specialisations and centres of excellence. The scientific community is disappointed by National's approach to innovation and technology. There's been a lack of communication and mixed messages from the government. They say they want more young people to develop skills in science and technology, and yet they've just cut postgraduate student allowances. National are letting New Zealanders down with their lack of vision and ideas. Mr. Speaker, there's been a persistent underinvestment by this government in R&D. National cut out the popular R&D tax credits that were brought in by the previous Labor government and oddly replaced them with a bureaucratic subsidy approach, which manufacturers and innovators in my electorate have told me makes them jump through hoops for Wellington public servants rather than to get on and do what they do best. And isn't it interesting that the current National government talks the talk about partnerships with business, but in fact walks the walk of an old-fashioned bureaucracy in an area where they clearly lack expertise. Mr. Speaker, National has just failed to understand the needs of a modern innovation ecosystem where there has to be centres of excellence with close partnerships between CRIs, universities and businesses, constant flow of information and people, and deep specialisation in areas of emerging market advantage. Mr. Speaker, we're seeing none of that. We're seeing a bureaucratic approach centred in Wellington, making businesses jump through hoops with a lack of investment and a lack of funding for the system overall. And all the while that this muddle is going on, National has failed to address the surrounding economic problems that are killing our innovative firms. Again today, the official cash rate held up, and the gap between that and rates in our key trading partners growing, and our exchange rate rising, and our best innovative firms going to the wall or being bought up by foreign corporations, our economy being hollowed out, and this government sitting on the sidelines watching it happen and doing nothing. Do they have no ideas? Say so, get out of the road, let the incoming Labor-led government save the country. If they have got ideas, for goodness sake, tell the country what they are and get on and do it, because small things like this, good as they may well be, are no solution for the problems facing the innovation sector. ATI in this context, Mr. Speaker, is just a fig leaf covering a multitude of sins. With declining real investment in R&D and a failure to address the key structural impediments, with a lot of devil in the detail for the Select Committee to sort out, Mr. Speaker, the government needs to be under no illusion that this small step will not deliver a research nirvana.
Help.
I call the honourable member